Hello and welcome to Mandibil and welcome to part 17 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's book, Essential Philosophy. And the last chapter we dealt with free will. The chapter was called What is Free Will? And to be quite honest, and I'm not trying to ditch Stefan Molyneux as such, but I don't understand what free will is, judging from is it the ability to, as he says here, capacity to compare proposed actions to ideal standard. I don't see that as will. Will is something that inevitably ends up creating a specific notion or a specific action and thereby a specific consequence, or the lack of that same imagined consequence, right? Something more along those lines. That going from there's some connection between idea and action in reality. That's the standard model is everything is bouncing together out in reality, and how can the mind determine by itself what to do without the mind can so sort of influence that reality. That's the criticism of from determinist side, right? And that seems impossible for the mind to change whatever the laws of nature says, right? But what they are forgetting that is or they're not aware of, is that their metaphysics is flawed, and what they're describing is how the mind describes that reality which they do not have access to, right? And the mind describing something is a different thing than the mind having to influence whatever it is, right? What's actually going on is going on beyond what you can experience, right? It seems as if our mind influences, but what we are talking about are really we are distanced from what is going on when that which could possibly will something into action is going on. It's behind the curtain, so to say, right? You could say sometimes I think of there's a term called, I'm not sure it's the best analogy, but there's something called the Cartesian Theater, right? That's mostly used, I think, as an argument for determinism. But if you just think about this, you're sitting in a cinema, in the old school cinema, right? You're sitting in sort of in the middle of the chairs and so on. There's a screen over there, and there's a projector behind you, right? And it's not like the projection is coming from behind you. The idea is that what you experience on your screen in your mind is coming from behind the screen, so to say. But your emotions and your interpretations, your objectifications are going on behind your awareness of your placement in that scenario, so to say, right? It's in a useful analogy, right? And what goes on behind your neck when you are at the movies, you do not really have access to, right? You have an idea that there might be a projector, there might be a guy handling the projector, there might be a room, and there might be some electricity, there might be something going on, but that part of your mind is inaccessible other than the effects it has that you experience through the screen, right? So it takes a little, this analogy may sound quite crazy to you if you haven't realized the idealist approach to metaphysics, right? Okay. There was a few highlights I wanted to mention. He brings in a lot of terms that haven't been classified or identified, defined, or anything. And that's a problem, right? That's a general problem in his book here and in his books in writings in general, right? You just bring in a term and use it as if everybody knows and understands. Maybe they do, but he doesn't know that unless he defines, at least to some extent, how it's supposed to be understood. And another thing is that it's a sign of bad philosophy if terms just arrive like that. It's in my opinion, it should be you should be careful and watch how that term is used to explain that which the guy or the girl writing the book is trying to argue for, right? Because establishing an argument and then bring in a new term that might have some connotations and presuppositions and prejudice and so on might help argue for the thing that is being argued, but it's a cheat because the argument was stated before that term was brought in, so to say. So just be careful when terms are brought in sort of out of left field, right? Okay, let me see. Yeah, there's this. He points out, imagine a thief. Well, how would I imagine a thief? How would I understand that that is a thief, right? Imagine a thief. What is that? Is it the color? Is it the sound? Is it the taste? Is it the feel? Is it the smell, right? What about that presupposed individual? But it could be a magpie, maybe. That could also be a thief, right? But an individual. How would I understand that? Okay, that's a thief, right? Well, I can't, because it's a violation of Hume's gap, right? And over here that he used the term robber. Okay, a robber runs into a store. Well, how do I know? Is it whenever I see some individual running into a store, is it then a robber? Right? He takes this. This is a sign of very, very, very bad ethics, right? He exposes his fallacious understanding of how to identify immorality, right? And this is the same thing. This is Hume's gap. This is the thing that Hume pointed out. Well, you're just saying there's a guy, there's a gal. Now he runs, and therefore he's immoral because robber is an immoral kind of operator on the market, or whatever one term you want to put on it, right? An immoral kind of individual. So individual, immoral individual. It's like is, ought not, right? It's Hume's gap problem, right? Okay. Then there was this one, which I would strain that you should be very careful with, right? Because he has not even got to the point where he has established understanding of knowledge, for instance, right? He hasn't actually, in my opinion, established in any rigidity that could be taken seriously an understanding of what it means to exist, what a fact is, what entails empiricism and not empiricism, and how to use it and how not to use it, an establishment of what it means, what ethics does, and what morality means, and does it need to be a moral principle, and sort of, he just throws out a term like ideal standards, and it can be absolute, right? What the hell, right? Arguing for this within a chapter called free will is completely blowing everything up, right? So in this case, people have to bring in the prejudice, and the presuppositions and interpretation, what an ideal standard is compared to maybe a moral principle or something like that, right? And bring in the idea of the 10 Commandments, and it's one freaking mess, right? This is so unserious. It's like he thinks that this is essential philosophy, and he's just hand painting, it's a Sidney Pollack painting claiming to be a road atlas or something like that, right? I'm not trying to ditch. What Sidney Pollack? It was Jackson Pollock, the painter, right? Not the director. And not to ditch, Pollock. I actually like his paintings. If we were dealing with that, right? At least I find them interesting and challenging. But and then he sort of ends the chapter, or no, not ending the chapter. That's later. But within the chapter, he says something like this: where the ideal standard is an absolute. When it doesn't explain when it's absolute and what it means that it's absolute, right? Is it a categorical imperative, just like Immanuel Kant? Then why, in this kind of light-hearted philosophy, why doesn't he bring in Immanuel Kant and say this guy 300 years ago, he talked about, or 200 years ago, talked about, the categorical imperative and so on, right? It's like, it's an absolute, but what else could it be, right? We generally find morality. The absolute is very fine morality. Okay, the categorical imperative is very fine morality. Because the hypothetical imperative, which is, if you want to mow your lawn, get a lawnmower, right? That's the kind of imperative, hypothetical imperative. If this is the case, I have a hypothesis that a lawnmower might be good, right? But categorical, it's like at all places, at all times, the only solution is this, right? But he doesn't explain in depth what an ideal standard is. He never explains what absolute is, and where we generally find what is generally. That doesn't sound like it's at every place at any time. It's like there's a fluffy boundary, right? That he's so much against. We find morality. You can't look with your goggles or something like that and find morality. Now I know it's a figure of speech, but why are you using these stupid words to explain what you mean, right? Don't make it even more cumbersome to try to understand philosophy by using fluffy terms that have sort of many meanings or something like that, right? Okay, just be careful when you read this. Okay, what I was trying to get to comes later here. Where the ideal standard is relative, that must be the hypothetical imperative, right? There we generally find aesthetics, culture, politeness, and other forms of social standard enforced by disapproval and ostracism rather than through retaliatory force. So this dichotomy. So if it's an absolute ideal standard, it is enforced by retaliatory force. Is that the way he sees it? Because then his morality is a blue stamping of initiating violence against somebody else. How else could you see it? Because you need to have an interpretation of what is going on. You don't want the violence in order to act against it. You want to act so that the violence doesn't occur. Otherwise, it's a stupid kind of ethics, because ethics is supposed to be thinking about how to act so that these bad things doesn't appear, right? You don't want someone to rape you and then say, aha, now it's immoral because I'm being raped, so now I can hit you in the face or something like that. No, I want rape not to occur. That's why I want ethics and morality, right? Retaliatory force. Holy shit, right? And then it comes here. You can shoot someone who's attacking you. You cannot shoot someone for being rude. Okay, so he makes a dichotomy. There's being rude, and there are attacks, right? And if who is going to determine whether or not you're being attacked? Well, that must be you, right? As an individual. So you say, okay, I'm being attacked, so I'm going to shoot you, right? And what's the difference between when that guy or girl is shot and you say, well, that guy attacked me? How do you prove that, right? You want to be in a situation where people don't attack each other. That's where ethics comes in, to make sure that it doesn't happen at all. There's not even an approach to it, right? If you have to wait until somebody attempts to attack you before you can say, aha, that's immoral, then it doesn't work. Because then you have to run around and wait until somebody attacks you or somebody steals from you and somebody rapes you before you can say, that's immoral. That's exactly what we don't want to happen, right? And this, you can shoot someone who's attacking. What? And we are talking about free will in this chapter, right? I mean, I can't believe how bad this is, right? It's an, I mean, I'm I'm lacking words for how stupid this is and dangerous, right? Telling people they can shoot left and right, basically, right, as they see fit, is fucking idiotic and dangerous and stupid, right? I urge you to be very careful when you are reading this, right? Be very careful, because it seems to me he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, right? Okay. And then there's the understanding of free will here, which I missed before. Before I thought, if we understand this definition of free will, I read, and then I said, where does the definition? And then the definition comes here. I didn't see that, right? Okay, but that's just a weird way to present it. Okay. Our human capacity to compare proposed action to ideal standard. And I didn't talk about just before, so I'm not going to go into deep. I don't like that kind of free will, right? It's like, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about free will, right? This is more like a justification of even to act morally, I would say, right? But acting morally entails that you can act. So it's just like, it's not completely stupid, but it doesn't feel like that he has a good grip on this, right? It doesn't. It really doesn't feel like that. Okay. There was this comparing his proposed actions to an ideal standard, comparing the contents of his mind to an ideal standard. Or he says that he might have switched from comparing the contents of his mind to proposed actions, but really one and the same. The contents of the mind can only be discerned through actions such as speaking or writing. But you have access to your own mind, right? What's going on in your own mind, that's actually all that you have, right? You have to have your senses open all the time to get whatever it is you think you're getting, right? If you do not have senses operating, there's nothing, right? And there would be nothing, in my opinion. There wouldn't be memories, there wouldn't be inductions or sort of reasoning and all this. It wouldn't be there, but what would you reason about if you couldn't experience something at base, some justification on potential experiences in the future compared to the present experience and the past? So it's like, without experiences, there's nothing, right? So everything is about your experience, in my opinion. So the contents of the mind can only be discerned through actions. Why? So if I mean, talking about myself, right? So I don't have to do anything to I don't have to act, speak, or write to understand if I may experience that house out there, right? I don't have to do anything or say anything or write anything. If I have to understand what goes on in other people's minds. And speaking can be lied and writing can be lied, right? He doesn't take these things into account. And apparently it isn't important, right? So that's stupid, right? Okay, I said my live recording just jumped into a part 2, so I hope that it. I don't know why it just did that. I've only been recording for some 20 minutes or 30 minutes or something like that. Okay. So there's a huge number of problems, right? He doesn't recognize all the basic potential fallacies in these parts of philosophy, right? And then he doesn't get to any rigid kind of understanding of, for instance, free will in this case, in my opinion, right? At least it's not useful enough to work for me, right? Change your mind. The next chapter is called Change Your Mind, Change Your Behavior. If I were able to if I were able to convince you that the world is a sphere and not flat, isn't it called if I was able to convince you that the world, I was, I were is the past tense? I'm not superb in English, but I think it would be correct to say if I was able to. But were, maybe this is in past tense or what it's called, right? Okay. I would attempt to do so only because I would expect you to no longer speak about supporting the flat earth. I'll take it from the start. If I were able to convince you that the world is a sphere and not flat, I would attempt to do so only because I would expect you to no longer speak about supporting the flat earth. Why? Okay, so now I convinced you. Now you shouldn't speak about that other theory. What? What kind of argument is that? Huh. And instead support that the word support. So it's not a proof. It's not an empirical. Well, you have to get to empiricism. You can't argue that something is the case, right? You can experience that something is the case. You can argue all you want about the shape of Earth. You can't get to the shape of Earth unless you experience the shape of Earth, right? It should be obvious to someone like Stefan Molyneux, who talks about objectivity and science and empiricism, and now he wants to tell people what is supposedly knowledge, and then they should report it. Is in fact, what's a fact? I'm sitting here and I'm looking at Earth out there through my window, right? But I can't tell you what shape it is because it's so large I can't encompass it in my immediate experience, right? And I can't get easily to a point, according to my own understanding on how the Earth is put together. It looks like I would have to get far away from the Earth, and the only way to do that is to go out into space, I would presume, right? And I can't go out into space and get to the shape of the Earth. So I don't have the fact, and neither do you if you're sitting in some sofa in Canada, right? If you continue to support the flat Earth hypothesis, I would be confused and annoyed. Oh no, the little feelings. You're getting triggered, are you? I would be confused and annoyed. Oh, confused and annoyed. Who gives a crap? I would say, but you admitted that the world was a sphere. If you replied, yes, the world is a sphere, I accept and admit that, but I'm still going to publicly talk about the world being flat. Well, that wouldn't make much sense, would it, right? Okay, so now he's using one of these contradiction arguments again, right? And at the same time, I'm reminded that Stefan Molyneux calls himself an atheist. But he keeps talking about Jesus and the Ten Commandments and theology and setting aside religion and Christianity over here. So yeah, we don't talk about those. I'm good friends with the Christians and all, but I'm talking about atheism all the time, right? While I'm licking Jesus in the ass, right? So aren't you doing that which you are claiming you shouldn't do? And what about politics? No. He's an anarchist, but he's halfway up the orange man's ass. For 5 years, right? Who's president, which is politics, right? And that's the state and government. And so, but you're an anarchist, right? Okay, so you are quite more stupid than this guy who is sort of confused about the shape of the Earth, right? I mean, give me a freaking break. Okay, changing your mind without changing your behavior makes no sense at all. But changing your mind without changing your behavior? I understand where he's going with that, and I might agree to some extent. If you for instance, if we're talking about the free will, right, or the idea of free will contra not having free will, if you say, well, there's no free will, why are you spending your hard-earned life on telling yourself the experience you have of something that could potentially be outside, that it doesn't have free will. It's like, maybe that's not the argument I'm going for. I'm going for more for, right, if you have free will and you argue, or if you argue that you don't sorry, if you argue that you don't have free will, what changes in your everyday compared to all those who believe they have free will, right? Even if they believe they have free will and they don't have free will. So if there's no difference in if you state that there's no free will, what could you point to that should be different for those who are acting in accordance with there being free will, right? But in the end, changing your mind is not the same as changing reality, right? Changing your mind is more in the sense of changing your understanding or your approach to objects, or your understanding of what it might entail in a different action. If I suddenly find out that tigers, I thought that they were my good friends and pets, and find out that they're fucking dangerous, are going to eat me, that will change my action towards tigers. I understand that, and I agree with that, right? If I was going to say, well, I just found out that tigers are dangerous, and now I'm going over to pet the tiger, well, then you didn't change anything according to your new understanding. But I don't see why that necessarily has to be a change in the action, right? It might. I mean, it's maybe maybe it's something that could be axiomatized, axiomated, made into an axiom. That if you change your mind about something, there must be some change in your action. Maybe there's something there, right? Maybe this is well, it depends on what you mean by, I would say. But it's worth thinking about this one, I would actually say, right? So it's an interesting one. I'm curious about that one. That might be something that could be used as an argument against free will or something like that, right? So why don't you stop doing this or start doing that? If you don't have free will, if you can't influence anything, why do you keep acting in a certain way, right? And if you went from a place where you thought you have free will to a place where you didn't have free will, that's the change in that particular individual, and nothing changed in your everyday. It's like, maybe it's a bad argument anyhow, because if you figure out that you do not have free will, you can't change anything. So you keep doing that which it would actually, maybe it would be the opposite, the other way around. You can prove determinism by showing there's no change. If I find out that what I'm doing my everyday, and then I figure out, holy shit, it's determined, right? And then I keep doing the same thing. Well, that would kind of prove determinism, because I can't change whatever I'm doing because it's determined. And if it changes, I can always say, well, that's just how the universe works, right? So maybe you can't use this as an argument. I'm not sure. It needs a bit of thinking, at least, right? Okay. It might happen for occasional reasons. Think of priests who lose their faith but continue in their occupation. But overall, it is both strange and rare for such contradictions between thought and action to manifest. In general, a conflict between belief and behavior only occurs when generally selfish incentives exist. A desire to continue drawing a salary, maintain a marriage, or avoid hostility or even attack from an ideological religious group, for example. Most of us would have sympathy for a person keeping secret thoughts separate from public actions out of fear of consequences, but that is not what I'm talking about. We strive to change people's minds because we hope to alter their future actions, and conversations and debates and arguments are all potential future actions. Determinism. What changes? Imagine that I used to be deeply religious. I went to church, prayed, baptized my children, donated 10% of my income to church, volunteered and did charity and missionary work, all in the name of my faith. Now imagine that one day I tell you I become an atheist. What would you expect in terms of my behavior? Surely you would expect me to stop going to church, stop praying, stop... Yeah. But these are sort of... These are actions that... Yeah, I understand. They must be based on some kind of will then. And if you no longer believed in will, then you would feel that it was determined. So I would say you would have to keep doing it. But it doesn't, I mean, there's nothing that says that it has to keep being the same thing happening in order for it to be determined. I don't think determinists believe that. So everything just happens as it does, but it's just something that it's a prophecy that is self-fulfilling. It's basically saying whatever is happening is that what is happening. That's determinism, right? It doesn't bring you anything. It just says, okay, well that happened. Okay, that's what happened, right? So it's always, if you believe you're in a given situation, you have 10 different choices. You can only act according to one choice, right? And looking back and say, I had other choices, but that's in the past. You can't get to that again, right? You can roll back time and say, now I'm going to do it the other way, right? Or one of the other ways. You always choose one path through your situations. And that's why determinists can say, well, that's just what happened. That's one way through, right? You can't see the choices. You can only see what happens and happened. You have a memory of what happened in the past. And that's one, point A, point B, point C, point D. It's like you can't go at a crossroad. You can't go two paths at the same time to show that there was two paths and I chose one, right? It's always, you can only remember the one choice that you potentially chose to take, and that could equally well be that was because you were determined to go that way, right? So, but determinism doesn't explain anything, in my opinion. It doesn't help you in any way. Maybe that's it should be used more in a like worst case scenario kind of approach, right? Where you say, well, if this is the case and that is the case, as I was sort of using a kind of Pascal's wager to get this is also where philosophy should come in, right? Philosophy is not necessarily always sort of quote proving stuff, as a term that Stefan Molyneux would use, right? But actually, okay, so what would I do in this situation where I don't have that insight? I have to do something, right? How do I approach it, right? And then these kinds of approaches, you could use some kind of philosophy or some kind of principle that you have thought about in these kinds of situations. Well, I have a principle here that I work from, right? These are the kinds of principles that the philosophers need to find, in my opinion, right? It's not like the philosophers need to say, but there's this, it's free will, the other one is stupid, right? If people want to be determinists, I'm fine with that, but don't expect that I'm going to interact with them, right? Or the other way around, if that's the case, right? Surely you would expect me to stop going to church, stop praying, stop donating to the church, and so on. What if I told you I was an atheist, but nothing about my behavior was going to change? I was going to continue attending church, praying, and so on. Surely you would be confused about my change of mind. Wouldn't it be strange if I said I no longer believe in God, but I continued exactly the same behaviors as when I did believe in God? It would be strange, but it doesn't. I mean, it's this problem of the hard problem of consciousness, right? That actions, there are direct connections between mental states, let's say, and actions. And if this action occurs, there's this mental state. And if this action does not occur, there's this mental state, right? He's trying to establish a connection, direct, settled connection between mental states and actions. And that's a dangerous path because it's impossible, right? So Let us go one step further in terms of strangeness. Imagine that when I was religious, I spent countless hours converting other people to my religion. Surely you would expect this behavior to change when I claim to have lost my faith and became an atheist. It's one thing to pursue something you don't believe in personally. It's quite another to pour enormous energies into convincing other people of something you no longer believe in. However bizarre this behavior may appear, however incomprehensible and contradictory it is, it still falls far short of the irrationality of the determinist. If I have a mental illness and believe that the President of the United States is speaking directly to me through my television set, and I spend an enormous amount of time talking back to him, engaging in imaginary conversations and debates, all with the deluded belief that I'm profoundly altering public policy in America. Surely this is something I should be cured of, not indulged in. So what exactly do I need to be cured of? What exactly is the nature of my delusion? Well, I'm confusing an inanimate object, a television, with a conscious human being. If I were actually teleconferencing with the President of the United States and we were having actual conversation, this would not be a delusion to be cured, but perhaps a position of influence to be envied. However, if in reality I'm merely yelling at a television, then clearly I need to be disabused of the fantasy that I'm having a conversation, since the television is a mere mechanical object that possesses no free will of its own. Are you beginning to see the problem? No, I'm not. This is also, right? This is slightly sophist, right? Are you beginning to see the problem? Yes. The reason I should stop debating with my television is that my television does not possess free will. How do you know? How do you know? How would you? You have to be able to identify free will to say that some object doesn't have free will. You have to look through the object and say, aha, nowhere to be found free will, right? If you do that with a human being, can you, a dead human being, can you, what's it called? Autopsy your way through a human being and say, aha, look, there's free will. You can't. It's the zombie problem, right? The problem of other minds. It's just your prejudice, right? We can imagine a similar, more understandable situation where you think you are debating a real life person on the other end of an internet chat program, when it turns out that the program is an automatic bot response system. But isn't that the that computer guy? What's it called? The Turing problem, right? The Turing. What's that called? The Turing problem? I'm not even sure. When you can't discern whether or not it's a computer or a human being you're talking to, right? Okay, decades ago there was a little program for primitive computer called ELIZA that mimicked the neutral, passive responses of a stereotypical psychiatrist. If you poured your heart out to this program and it prompted you to be more open, speak more honestly, and say more, it would be easy to imagine the computer had developed curiosity and empathy. If you think you are talking to a person and it turns out you're talking to a robot, you would probably give up on the conversation, since you would recognize that the robot does not possess free will. But you can't recognize that. I'm not saying that the robot has free will, but you can't say that it hasn't free will, right? Because you have to tell us how you identify it. If it's, I'm putting a marker here, right? If it's human capacity. Well, why do you say human capacity? So it has to be a human. How do you know, right? It has the capacity to compare proposed action to ideal standards. How do you know that robot can't compare to ideal standards, right? I mean, it's like, how do you know? It's not what you know. It's like, if you're saying, if I can't discern it or say it, it is because it is not the case, right? That's a problem. That's a very big problem. If I can't see it, it doesn't exist, right? Because in many terms, if the ball rolls over or under the sofa, you're not saying, well, there's no ball, right? You're saying the ball is under the sofa, right? So you extrapolate or you induce that into an understanding of what is going on, right? Or is it deduction? I think it's actually deduction, but I'm not. Okay, you know what I mean, right? Okay, if I stop believing in ghosts, it makes sense for me to stop ghost hunting. If I say that I have switched from being a Democrat to a Republican, but I continue to vote Democrat, yeah. But these, you're just trying to, when you think that, you act like that. And if you say something else and you still act that way, that's because you're thinking differently, right? You can't make that connection. And be careful, reader, please understand that there's no way of saying that because this action occurred, there is something going on in the mind that is this, right? You can't do that. That's a fallacy, right? And it's also, what is going on is always an interpretation. And the interpretation is not the same as that which goes on in the mind, right? You're not talking about the same thing. If you're saying robber, there's not going, or thief, there's not thief going on in the mind, right? Of that object you call a thief, right? So you're talking about two different kinds of stuff and comparing them as if they're the same. So there are huge problems in this. This is no way nearly as easy as he makes it seem here, right? I am a staunch empiricist. Really? Really? Which means I judge people not by their words, but by their deeds. As the old biblical saying goes, by their deeds shall you know them. I care what people say, but I really care what they do, since the truth of the mind is found in actions. No, it isn't. It isn't, right? You can't say, neither of them. What they say might not match what they think, but what they do might not even match what they think, right? You as an actor should know that, right? Understand that. You can't judge an actor by the actions, can you, right? And if you're not even aware that there's a sort of an acting thing going on, you might think, wow, that's a thief, and then it's just, some film recording, right? So how do you know? You don't know, right? And don't give me these freaking fluffy boundary arguments, right? I care what people say, but we are over here. As Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Did he say that? I would like a quote, please. Would somebody give me a quote? I haven't read too much Aristotle. If I am hiking through a thick forest with someone and she claims she wants to get to a certain distant destination and knows how to get there, but refuses to check our direction with a map, a compass, or a GPS, I know she is far more interested in being right than going in the right direction. You don't know that. You can't. It's something you can't know because you don't have that empirical. You can't have empiricism into other people's minds. You just said you're an empiricist. Oh, you're a staunch empiricist. And now you say you can know what is in somebody's mind. Do you have any idea how fucking crazy this is, right? It's ridiculous. Empiricism is not about knowledge, right? Empiricism is that the knowledge can only be gained through experience. Okay, so now you says, I know she is more interested. So now you can know an incentive, right? What is that? That's something going on in her mind. Well, you can't get to other people's minds, right? It's on the same fucking pages here, right? The same on the opposite pages, right? It's just there, man. Come on. It's ridiculous. I need to put in some juice here. Hang on a second. Yep. Hang on. There we are. Okay. It's just like, come the frick on. You don't even understand the core problems of metaphysics, right? And epistemology. It's ridiculous. It is actually fucking ridiculous, right? We are all generally raised with the personal responsibility of free will. We are all generally raised. Who gives a shit? People were raised with the idea that the earth was flat, 1,000 years ago. That doesn't mean that it was flat, right? I'm not saying it's either flat or round or square or whatever. I don't give a shit what shape it is. It doesn't matter really what shape it is. It is what shape it is. I'm just having to drive my car anyway, right? As a child, if I took another child's toy, I was told to give it back, and I learned the virtue of sharing or respecting other people's property. If I took another child's toy, no one ever said about me, well, little Steph is just a machine. He has no free will, he's just doing what he does, and there's no point blaming him, any more than there is any point blaming a cloud for raining on you. If a boy deliberately drives a remote-controlled toy car into a dozing cat, we blame the boy, not the toy. But for a determinist, there's no difference between the two. Does the determinist refrain from assigning any responsibility to the boy somehow? And I would agree. This is a great point. This is where, the determinists, by their action, they are not proving that there's free will, but they are not, it doesn't point in the direction that things are determined. Why are they yelling at the persons who they believe have no free will to change whatever action they perform? Because it's just a rock rolling down a mountain, right? Human beings are just weird rocks in a way for a determinist, right? So it's like, well, why are you yelling at the person hitting the child or whatever it is, right? If that's what's going to happen, nothing is going to change. You making noises to individuals is not going to change whatever happens in a determinist world, right? So why are you telling people what to do and what not to do, right? It's the same as implicitly believing that you can change their actions in the future, right? But if you're a determinist, you can't change anything. So that's a good point, right? That's just where where it's not a proof of anything. I would stress that. But if you're dealing with such a person, you know that it's very likely something to be a little wrong here, right? They're out to manipulate you more likely than actually getting ahead in philosophy, right? And I would say, okay, thank you very much. See you some other time, right? We are all raised embedded in the notion of free will, personal responsibility, and ethics. In this sense, we are all raised religious. At some point, determinists discard the idea of free will, just as some religious people discard the idea of God. My eternal question to determinists is, now that you have given up on the idea of free will, what changes? What does change? I have had countless public debates with determinists, and I have never once received a straight answer. Determinists call into my philosophy show aiming to change my mind about free will. They bring arguments and evidence and empiricism and science to bear on the question, in the hopes that I will accept their perspective and change my mind. They want me to use my power to change my mind, to give up on the idea that I can change my mind. Okay, but if you have a dualist worldview, right, what is going on? It doesn't determinist doesn't say that your mind is determined. They say that reality is determined. But your mind, whatever goes on there, can't change it, right? So changing your mind does not deal with determinism, in my opinion, right? Or free will or determinism. Your mind is independent, according to those who talk about determinism. If you have an idealist approach, which I believe is the correct one, the determinism determinism free will debate takes another dimension, or what it becomes, the question becomes different, right? And I would say that the determinist slash free will debate is an artifact of bad metaphysics, right? As so much in philosophy is. They want, once I accept that an entity does not have free will, a robot, for instance, I no longer invest time and energy debating with that entity. No. And if you were a determinist, why would you debate? Why would you discuss anything, right? You just sit down and wait until something happens, right? Why would you do anything, right? And but then they can use that. But that's just what happened. Okay, so I went to work, right? That was what's supposed to happen, apparently, right? The determinists can't explain why it happens. They can only say, but that was what happened because it happened, right? So it's sort of a tautological stance in a way, right? It happened because it happened. Well, then you're not explaining anything, right? No, but the universe and all these laws and yeah. Those are mental abstractions. Those are not real life, you could say, right? You don't act according to gravity when you work. Your whole being has been sort of honed to operate in a gravitational field of this particular kind, right? In video games, there are often pre-programmed enemies that attack you. I've never heard of any sane individual trying to reason these computerized avatars into pacifism or trying to get the two-dimensional robots to accept the non-aggression principle and learn how to debate, rather than fire giant rockets at their digital opponent's head. Computer enemies in a video game have no free will of their own, so no one tries to reason with them. In massive combat games, no one ever offers up treaty conditions and up to the computerized opponent, assuming this option is not programmed into the game somehow, because the computer opponent is just following its predetermined script. Yeah, but you can't get to the predetermined script, and neither can determinists, right? No, I have never seen any determinist predict some other individual's action. Please, because if some determinist was sitting beside me and say, in 5 seconds you're going to do this, I would try to make sure that I didn't do that, right? So determinists cannot predict anything. They can only say, okay, it happened and therefore it should happen, right? They're always looking behind them and say, well, I guess it happened because it happened, right? But they can't look ahead and say, well, it's going to happen this way, right? They can't determine the future. The determinists are looking behind themselves in the past. So there is it's just an artifact of bad metaphysics, right? I'm not saying I'm not trying to prove free will, but I believe you can't prove it because it's or you can't point to it directly and say, so there it is. That's how it is, right? You can only make circumstantial arguments like Stefan Molyneux is doing here, but I've never seen a computer program change because I argue with it or something like that. But that doesn't mean that there's something going on behind that mind, a person, that there's certain direct connections between mental states and actions. You can't get to that because of the hard problem of consciousness. And then if you think you can get to that, you need to tell me how you get over the hard problem of consciousness, please. Because that's a problem that no scientist has ever solved yet, right? I listened to a podcast just yesterday with the guy called Sean Carroll, who's, what's it called? He's a physicist of some kind, right? And he's, grappling with the big questions of the universe and the laws of the universe and quantum mechanics and all sorts of stuff, right? And he says, well, I believe that at some point in the future we will get to explain consciousness, right? In other words, he believes it's just a matter of time until we jump the gap between what's going on in reality and what's going on in the mind, right? Which is another way of saying we haven't solved the hard problem of consciousness yet. But it seems that Stefan Molyneux has, so why doesn't he call up Sean Carroll and tell him that, well, I've solved the hard problem of consciousness? Well, actually, what about good old Sam Harris and all these guys, right? There are loads of people who would be interested in hearing about how to solve the hard problem of consciousness. Maybe most importantly, David Chalmers, right? Who came up with the idea, right? Or who formulated the problem. In the science fiction movie The Matrix, one character decides he wishes to return to the artificial delusions created by the master robots. But the only way he can do that is by erasing his knowledge that his prior life was in fact a delusion. A mind once stretched by a new idea never regains its original shape. Okay, that sounds like a quote from somewhere. Once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original shape. It's a metaphor, right? I understand if there's no going back, right? It's sort of the red pill, right? Which is also a Matrix reference. That if you once understand something and you understand that your prior understanding wasn't correct, right? There's not really any way to go back to the other one. You have been red pilled, and you can't get back and get blue pilled again, right? It's just not possible because the new arguments are so much better, right? Morally and philosophically speaking, what is more important than the question of free will versus determinism? If I accept certain absolutes, they must change my behavior. That is how we know I accept them. If I think I can fly unaided, I am cured when I no longer try to fly unaided, as long as I continue. But what he's attempting is to tell everybody there is free will, right? He's trying to establish some kind, at least convince you that there's free will and you shouldn't take determinism. But I don't like that, really. I don't like to be sophisticated, sophistized, I don't know the word, but being manipulated into, okay, I guess this is the case, right? If people want to be determinists, fine. Then don't work with them. Avoid them, right? Avoid them. Say, I don't believe in determinism, right? I am convinced about free will, so we can't work together, right? That's how it should be, in my opinion, right? Because then that determinist position, if it's ridiculous, will look ridiculous when they act accordingly, right? But me trying to convince that person that there's free will in order to enforce my understanding upon them is equally stupid as that guy who's a determinist trying to enforce his determinism on me, right? So let them learn by doing, right? Go over there, determinists, and behave as you see fit, right? If I truly accept the idea that everyone, myself included, is just a robot with no capacity for choice, free will, morality, preferring a particular state over any other state, or the capacity to compare proposed actions to ideal standards, then I will stop trying to change people's minds. I must stop debating people. I must stop trying. No, you don't have to. I don't see why you have to. There's no direct connection between what is going on in reality, or what you consider objective reality, and their minds. There are no direct connection you can point to because of the hard problem of consciousness, right? I must also give up the idea of punishment. Oh, you have an idea of punishment. Punishment is another, is a sophist term for torture, right? Punishment is a sophist term for torture, in my opinion, right? It's a euphemism, I think it's called. When you change the word, but it's basically the same going on, but the new word sounds much better than the old word, right? If a man uses a phone to call in a bomb threat, we don't put the phone in jail because the phone has no free will. If the man also has no free will, then it makes about as much sense to throw him in jail. Yeah, we keep going on this, right? I'm getting pretty pissed and tired of this. Determinists respond, this is a boringly repetitive pattern of debating with determinists. You point out the logical consequences of the beliefs and then deny those logical consequences. I say the logical consequence of accepting determinism is refraining from the debating. I say no logical consequence of accepting determinism. I say the logical consequence of accepting determinism is giving up on the idea of truth. They say they can be determinists and still believe in truth. In other words, they accept all of the consequentialist results of accepting free will by calling themselves determinists. This is quite literally insane. Here is the equivalent. If you no longer believe in God, it doesn't make sense to continue going to church. Oh no, I can stop believing in God and still makes perfect sense to go to church. It might not make sense to go to church, but you can't get to that other person's sense, right? You can't get to their sense. What you are saying when you are an empiricist is you can actually experience that sense, right? You can tell him that there should be this sense in you, or you're lying about your sense. Well, then you're actually saying that you can't get to the sense. So you can't point to a sense that can make sense, right? It's just it's circumstantial. It's an indirect proof in that. Well, it should change if you believe in this and that. Who cares? If a person says, I don't believe in free will, well, great, fuck you. I'm going the other direction, right? Just leave them be, right? Leave them be. Oh no, I can't stop believing in God, but still totally believe in heaven. Ditto for praying and... Once you accept that the television set is not the president, it makes no sense to... And although by using this way, this God and church argument, he's actually sucking up to religious people who are actually going to church because they believe in God, right? So he's indirectly coddling the Christians, right? This is very good sophist trick. Once you accept that the television set is not the president, it makes no sense to continue pretending to have a conversation with the television. Oh no, I totally accept that it's just a television set, but that in no way prevents me from having a conversation with the president. What can one do in these situations? Walk away. Exactly! 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 Walk away! Good one! Run away! Okay, determinism of emergent properties. Emergent properties. Ooh. I will take that the next time. So I hope that this recording, which was for some reason cut in two, will still be kept together when I when I get to it on YouTube. So see you there. Otherwise, leave me a comment, give me a subscription, or click the bell, and if you want, send a few shekels my way using donation links down below, right? Otherwise, have a nice day. See you next time.